Welcome learners. Today we are going to begin with the Module 45B in your Week 12 of learning in the 3 months refresher course in Environmental Education for Teacher Training Institutes at the Swayam portal offered by the School of Education, Aligarh Muslim University. The theme for our learning today is some success stories of Indian states and biodiversity parks and sanctuaries. We will also learn how to upkeep cities that are evaluated for Green City tag and the ranking procedures of states and cities. The learning objectives today are the protected area approach to biodiversity conservation. You would recall that in the last module, that is the 45A, we discussed the important point of whether a species-centric approach is more beneficial and relevant for biodiversity or a site-specific or landscape-specific approach. Today, when we will do protected areas, we will try to see the landscape-specific approach for biodiversity conservation. We will look at the in situ and ex situ measures, the various protected area categories of IUCN, and then the existing different types of protected areas in India. Finally, we will look in great detail at the biodiversity parks in various cities of India and also the green cities, clean cities and their evaluation procedure. Let us first look at the definition of protected area. Generally, protected areas are understood to be those in which human occupation or at least the exploitation of resources is limited. The definition that has been widely accepted across regional and global frameworks has been provided by the IUCN in its categorization guidelines for protected areas. The definition is as follows, and I quote, "A clearly defined geographical space recognized, dedicated and managed through legal or other effective means to achieve the long-term conservation of nature with associated ecosystem services and cultural values." I unquote. Protected areas are locations which receive protection because of their recognized natural, ecological and or cultural values. They are designated with the objective of conserving biodiversity. Today, there are more than 1,67,000 protected areas in the world, and they represent between 10 and 15% of the world's land surface area. Now, an important point of protected areas is this, that human activities, and we have been talking about anthropocentric activities again and again as part of this course, and protected areas are those areas where anthropocentric activities, that is man-made changes to the habitat, to the landscape and to the ecosystem are prohibited. Here in this map, you can see the distribution of protected area. There are certain regions in the world where a large number of protected areas are found, whereas there are certain regions where too much of development, urbanization and population growth has resulted in less than 1% of area designated as a protected area. Now, let us look at the various categories of protected areas that have been defined by the IUCN, that is the International Union for Conservation of Nature, which is a prime organization situated in Switzerland, which does research and policy framework development for the conservation of nature, for the conservation of biological species of flora and fauna. And in our last module, we have also talked about the various categories of threat to the endangered species, to the critically extinct species, and to the other threatened species which have been developed and informed by the IUCN. Now, according to IUCN, there are these 6 categories of protected areas. Category 1A is a strict nature reserve. Category 1B is a wilderness area. Category 2 is a national park. Category 3 is natural monument or feature. Category 4 is habitat species management area. Category 5 is protected landscape seascape, and category 6 is protected area with sustainable use of natural resources. So, these are the 6 categories, and the first has 2 subcategories under which all the protected areas of the world they exist, certainly notified by the local governments and nations. Now, based on these IUCN categories that have been prescribed for protected areas around the world, in India also there is a very elaborate, old and extended protected area network. The PAs in India are those in which human occupation or at least the exploitation of the resources is limited. The definition that has been widely accepted across regional and global frameworks has been provided by the IUCN, or the International Union for Conservation of Nature, in its categorization guidelines for protected areas. Now, there are several kinds of protected areas as we have seen in the IUCN categories, and they vary by level of protection depending on the enabling laws of each country or the regulations of the international organizations involved. The term protected area in India also includes marine protected areas. Now, marine protected areas are those which are found alongside the oceans and the seas of the world. The boundaries of these marine protected areas are some area of the ocean and transboundary protected areas that overlap multiple countries, which remove the borders inside the area for conservation and economic purposes. Now, officially in India, there is proper state recognition according to the law and the constitution of the country for these 5 types of protected areas. Now, a certain area may be known for many of its qualities regarding biodiversity protection, but it should either be a national park or a sanctuary, a conservation reserve, a community reserve, or a marine protected area. These are the primary categories under which, according to the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, the geographical regions can be notified for the protection of biodiversity and for the prohibition or at least the limiting of resource exploitation by man. that is the limiting and prohibiting of man-made changes and of anthropocentric activities. So, we have to remember that there are only 5 types of protected areas, which are called national parks, sanctuaries, conservation reserves, community reserves and the marine protected areas. There are several other types of national, state and international properties according to which areas may be called as biosphere reserves or important bird areas or tiger reserves or elephant reserves, but they will not be called a protected area unless and until they are under one of these categories of national parks, sanctuaries, conservation reserves, community reserves or the marine protected areas. Now, in India, the total geographical area, that is the total land, terrestrial area of the country, only 4.39% is covered by protected areas, and this is many square kilometers, as you can see in the table behind. There are 104 national parks, 544 sanctuaries, 77 conservation reserves and 46 community reserves. So, in total we have 771 different types of protected areas, and they cover 4.39% of the total land area of the country. So, the geographical area of the entire country is 32,87,263 square kilometer, whereas the forest cover according to the Forest Survey of India report of 2015 is 7,01,673 square kilometer. This happens to be 21.34% of the geographical area of India. Now, this should not be confused with the protected area, because as the table behind shows that in our country the total percentage of protected areas is only 4.39%. So, the remaining area that is covering the 21.34% of the geographical area of the country under forests is actually various other categories of forests like social forest developed by the social forestry divisions of the forest department, like reserve forest and like protected forest. There are areas that come under JFM, that is called joint forest management. There are village forests, there are community forests, and together they constitute the total forested area of the country, that is 21.34% and 7,01,673 square kilometer. But this should not be confused with the protected areas. We call an area a protected area for the conservation of biodiversity and wildlife only when it is either a national park or a sanctuary or a conservation reserve or a community reserve or a marine protected area. Now, what is a national park? A national park is an area which is strictly reserved for the betterment of wildlife and where activities like forestry, grazing or cultivation are not permitted. Private ownership rights are not allowed. They are open for scientific study, and in national parks the emphasis is on the preservation of a single plant or animal species. Now, you can see we have 104 national parks in the country, and the Corbett National Park in Uttarakhand was the first national park that was declared in 1921, and it has an area of 1318.5 square kilometer. We have many other very popular national parks like the Dudhwa National Park in UP, the Gir National Park in Gujarat, the Kanha National Park in Madhya Pradesh, the Kangar Ghati National Park in Chhattisgarh, the Kaziranga National Park in Assam, the Nanda Devi National Park again in Uttarakhand, the Sariska National Park in Rajasthan, the Silent Valley National Park in Kerala, the Sundarban National Park in West Bengal, and the Kevladev Ghana National Park, which is actually a bird sanctuary which is in Bharatpur, Rajasthan. Then comes the second category of wildlife sanctuary. To assure the natural condition necessary to protect species, group of species, biotic community or physiological features of the environment, a wildlife sanctuary is notified. Private ownership rights are allowed in a wildlife sanctuary as long as they do not interfere with the well-being of the animals. So, this is a slight difference between a national park and a wildlife sanctuary, and controlled harvesting can be permitted in these areas. Some sanctuaries are larger than national parks, but they do not have core and buffer zones. To mention a few, we have the Patna Bird Sanctuary in UP, the Hazaribagh Wildlife Sanctuary in Jharkhand, the Mudumalai Wildlife Sanctuary in Tamil Nadu, the Ahiron Bird Sanctuary in West Bengal, it's near Murshidabad, the Mount Abu Wildlife Sanctuary in Rajasthan, the Katania Ghat Wildlife Sanctuary in Uttar Pradesh, the Kaimur Wildlife Sanctuary again in Uttar Pradesh, the Pech Mogli Sanctuary in Madhya Pradesh, and the Kedarnath Wildlife Sanctuary in Uttarakhand. Then comes the newly introduced category of protected areas, that is called conservation reserve. Declared by the state governments in any area owned by the government, particularly the areas adjacent to national parks and sanctuaries, and those areas which link one protected area with another. Such declaration should be made after having consultations with the local communities. Declared for the purpose of protecting landscapes, seascapes, flora and fauna and their habitat, and the rights of people living inside a conservation reserve are not affected. Some of the examples are Asan Barrage Conservation Reserve, Uttarakhand and in Himachal, and then there is the Jhilmil Jheel also, which is a conservation reserve. And finally comes the category of community reserves. Now, this is a category that has been introduced by keeping in mind the historical nature of the relationship of the indigenous local people of India with nature, with wildlife, with natural ecosystems and with habitats where they do not own the land and where they do not own the species in it, but they are cohabitants with flora and fauna in a particular piece of land. Hence, by their own will, for cultural reasons, for religious reasons, the community, the local community comes forward to protect these forests and these protected areas, the wild flora and fauna. Now, community reserves can be declared by the state government in any private or community land not comprised within a national park, sanctuary or a conservation reserve, where an individual or a community has volunteered to conserve wildlife and its habitat. So, with community reserves, willingness is very important. Community reserves are declared for the purpose of protecting fauna, flora and traditional or cultural conservation values and practices. The rights of people living inside a community reserve are not affected. Then comes the category of marine protected areas. They are essentially a space in the ocean where human activities are more strictly regulated than the surrounding waters. Similar to parks we have on land, These places are given special protections for natural or historical marine resources by local, state, territorial, native, regional or national authorities. In peninsular India, we have many such marine protected areas. There are many other categories, as I told you earlier: tiger reserves, elephant reserves, biosphere reserves, Ramsar wetland sites, natural World Heritage sites, important coastal and marine biodiversity areas, and the important bird areas in India. Very quickly, we will look at these categories. The tiger reserves are area for protection of tigers and their prey species. As you know, tiger happens to be the national animal of our country, a majestic wild cat that we should protect, and a wild cat that exists on the top of the ecosystem. That means it can survive only when its prey base and only when the natural vegetation, which are the primary producers of the landscape, are also protected. So, we have tiger reserves under the Project Tiger, which was launched by the Government of India in the year 1973. The project aims at ensuring a viable population of the Royal Bengal tigers, that is the Panthera tigris, in the natural habitat. In 1973-74, we had around 9 tiger reserves in the country, but today the number has grown up to 49 and it covers some 69,793.24 square kilometer. The PAs have the status of both national parks and tiger reserves. Say for example, the Corbett National Park is a national park also and a tiger reserve also. So, this is a list of some tiger reserves. We have many more in the country, and in this map you can see the locations of these tiger reserves. Then there is the category of elephant reserves. They exist in 16 states. It is as part of the Project Elephant that was launched by the government in 1992, and today we have 32 such elephant reserves, and the objective of elephant reserves is to protect elephants, their habitat and corridors, to address issues of man-animal conflict, and to ensure the welfare of captive elephants. Then we have biosphere reserves. Again, a particular site can be at the same time a biosphere reserve also and a protected area also. In India, presently we have 18 notified biosphere reserves, and these are sites established by countries and recognized under UNESCO's Man and Biosphere program to promote sustainable development based on local community efforts and sound science. The program of Biosphere Reserve was initiated by UNESCO in 1971, and the purpose of the formation of the Biosphere Reserve is to conserve in situ all forms of life along with its support system in its totality, so that it could serve as a referral system for monitoring and evaluating changes in natural ecosystems. The first Biosphere Reserve of the world was established in 1979. Since then, the network of Biosphere Reserves has increased to 631 in 119 countries across the world. This is a list of some Biosphere Reserves. There is Nanda Devi, which is a national park as well as a Biosphere Reserve in Uttarakhand, Manas in Assam, the Gulf of Mannar in Tamil Nadu, the Great Nicobar in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and the Panchmari in the MP. Ramsar wetlands are those wetlands which are preserved to give conservation and refuge to migratory birds, because these are birds that perform transboundary migration every year. as part of the Ramsar Convention, which was held in Iran at a city named Ramsar in 1972. This treaty was signed by various countries, and today, as part of this treaty in India, we have 26 wetlands that have been designated as Ramsar sites. The Ramsar Convention is an international treaty for the conservation and sustainable utilization of wetlands, recognizing the fundamental ecological functions of wetlands and their economic, cultural, scientific and recreational value. Because this treaty was signed in 1972 on 2nd February, we celebrate the World Wetland Day every year on 2nd February. Then under a similar project from the UNESCO, we have World Heritage Sites. As you would understand and appreciate that we are born to inherit immense cultural and historical heritage. Similarly, what we have inherited is also very precious natural heritage from our ancestors, and it is our responsibility to conserve it. Hence, a heritage site is a place such as a building, city, complex, desert, forest, island, lake, monument or mountain that is listed by the UNESCO as being of special cultural or physical significance. As of July 2015, in the world, 1031 sites were listed, of which 802 were cultural sites and 197 natural and 32 mixed properties. In India, we have 32 heritage sites. Say for example, on the one hand, the Taj Mahal in Agra is also a World Heritage Site, and on the other hand, the Bharatpur Bird Sanctuary, which is known as the Kevladev Ghana National Park, is also a World Heritage Site. Then we have important coastal and marine biodiversity areas. India has taken several steps to achieve the National Biodiversity Target number 6 and the Aichi Biodiversity Target number 11, which aim to conserve a substantial portion of the coastal and marine areas in the country and world respectively. That is why India today has 44 important coastal and marine biodiversity areas that are known as ICMBAs. Then we have important bird areas. Important bird areas are designated according to the number of globally threatened bird species, the restricted range species, the biome restricted species and congregations, and they are enabled by the BirdLife International, which is a premier organization based in the UK for studying conservation of birds. And in India, many sites have been notified as important bird areas. Say for example, there is a small lake, a jheel near the Aligarh district, which is called Shekha Jheel, and this has been identified as an important bird area because of the large number of migratory waterfowl which come to this jheel for their wintering. Now, amidst rapid urbanization, a lot of habitat destruction has taken, and it is becoming very difficult to maintain these protected areas on the one hand, and on the other hand extremely challenging to notify new protected areas. Hence, several state governments, several municipal councils, NGOs have come forward to establish in their cities some biodiversity parks. These are very good success stories that can be emulated by citizens in the urban environment who care about their surroundings, who care about nature around them. And because of this consciousness for biodiversity protection and for having biodiversity parks and for having a sensitization for clean and green cities in India. Today, as part of the Swachh Bharat Sarvekshan and the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, which is the Clean India campaign, we have many cities that are doing very well in keeping their environment clean and green. A survey was conducted in 2017 and then later on in 2018, and India's Indore city in the state of Madhya Pradesh was declared as the cleanest city. On the second number as part of this survey was the capital of Madhya Pradesh, Bhopal, which was declared as the second cleanest, and the third position was occupied by Chandigarh. As regards conformity and coming up to the model of the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, it was found that Jharkhand is the best state in this regard. Now, these surveys, they are conducted to evaluate the green cities, and they are given marks out of 4,000 for their performance. Data is collected from interactions with the municipal body, from direct observations, and from taking feedback of citizens. Lakhs and lakhs of people have been interviewed as to what is their perception about their city, whether it is green, clean or not. Now, what is a biodiversity park in a city? It is not a protected area like a national park or a sanctuary, but it is an area which has been specially created to give refuge to biodiversity. Now, everything is enabled by law and legislature. So, Biodiversity Park can be a state forest initiative under the state forest legislature, and it fulfills the criteria of a deemed forest and should be protected as such. Now, in a biodiversity park, the objective is to harbor as many species of flora and fauna as possible. There can be medicinal plants whose cultivation needs care. There can be insects, birds, butterflies, moths who get refuge in these biodiversity parks, which are surrounded by the urban environment in a bustling city. It is always a good idea to include a water body in a biodiversity park, so that because of edge effect there is a larger number of species, and it will be good if local fauna, indigenous flora is showcased in a biodiversity park. Now, in India, we have many laudable efforts which should be taken up as success stories for establishing biodiversity parks in various cities as part of special initiatives of the state governments and of the municipal councils, educational institutions and NGOs for the sake of protection of biodiversity. A very notable example is that of the Yamuna Biodiversity Park, which is a collaborative effort between the Delhi Development Authority and the School of Environmental Studies at the Delhi University, who acquired land sometime in 2001 and 2 and developed it as a very large biodiversity park alongside the Yamuna river. Now, this was earlier a catchment area where a lot of standing water used to be there during the time of the flooding of the Yamuna, but then this wasteland has today been developed into a very beautiful, large and sprawling biodiversity park, which is also serving as a center for interpretation of nature and for environment education. Similarly, in Gurugram, there is the Aravali Biodiversity Park, which showcases and encompasses the unique biodiversity of the Aravali hill ecosystem. The city of Ranchi in Chhattisgarh has also made its own small biodiversity park, where there are many species of that region. In Aligarh near Mumbai, there is a very beautiful biodiversity park, which is known as the Shapurji Pelanji Native Biodiversity Garden. In short, the SP Native Biodiversity Garden, which is very close to the Elephanta Caves, and with the help of environmentalists and local naturalists, a lot of camps and walks and treks are organized in this biodiversity park, and this is specially dedicated to medicinal plants, butterflies and insects. And in the National Capital Region of Delhi, in Noida, nowadays a new biodiversity park is being developed in the Sector 91, which is going to be a 75-acre biodiversity park with lots of different types of habitats in it, and with a cycling trek for nature enthusiasts to go and to keep cycling between these 8 or 9 types of different biomes that are being created in that biodiversity park. So these are some very good success stories of having biodiversity in the cities in the form of these biodiversity parks. Now, park management involves some physical and biological interventions, and it can include creating of mounds and embankments, having vermicompost and biofertilizer of kitchen waste, having treated water from sewage water treatment plants for irrigation, and it should always have a variety of habitats like grasslands, woodlands, wetlands, etc. that have been created. The immense benefits of environment protection can be realized by having biodiversity parks. It enables conservation of many hundreds of species of flora and fauna, and it mitigates the ill effects of global warming and climate change. As you know, development and rapid urbanization gives rise to too much pollution, especially particulate matter pollution like construction dust. These are all getting trapped in the biodiversity parks if they are there. They also help in trapping rainwater and maintaining the groundwater table and keeping the water cycle in nature stable. They are a very good opportunity for improving health and for giving recreational space to the human population around, and also for teachers. They are a wonderful place to go to for nature education and environmental awareness. Some of the activities that are conducted in these biodiversity parks are nature workshops, walking on the biodiversity trails, having nature interpretation centers with models and pictures, sometimes summer salad making competitions where the nature walk participants can do things with their own hands, the program for school children for adopting a tree, taking care of it round the year, writing their name alongside it, and having a sense of belonging with that tree. The students of the school can also sponsor and maintain a bird feeder in a biodiversity park or a nest box for the declining sparrow population. Now, your activity for this module is to create a bird feeder and a bird bath in your garden. The picture of a bird feeder shows that how best out of waste has been made, and a very effective bird feeder can be placed in your garden where birds can come and take the grain. Now, if you live in an apartment, you can start a garden in your balcony or on your terrace garden which has indigenous species of plants that attract birds and insects, and you can put a bird feeder there and daily observe the insects and butterflies and birds coming to your garden. You can make a list, and this is how there can be also competitions between the students for making these lists of species that they observe in their gardens. I hope in this module you have learnt to keep your cities clean and green, and you have learnt to do your own little bit for the sake of biodiversity. Thank you so much and happy learning.